And whatever we did, we couldn't get the guy dislocated from the minivan. You'd be surprised how well he just stuck in there. And really, it's amazing how much blood there is in a person. So anyway,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was how I
absolutely.
that was how I won the Medal of Honor. So how have you been?
Awesome. I've been good. I participated in the Meatly Jam this weekend and failed miserably to actually produce something worthwhile playing. There was less blood, obviously, although there was a bit of blood when my cat decided to, he fell off his scratching post and decided to reach for the nearest object he could hang on to, and that turned out to be my hand. Listeners to the audio portion of the show is unable to see that the little bastard, I'm holding up my hand right now, the little bastard just cut a big tear down the side of my hand. So
But
yeah.
that fits well within the limits of survival, so that's pretty reasonable, I'd say.
All right.
Cats
But
get a free pass at that.
I'm still impressed that you managed to actually teleport someone into the side of a minivan and then watch him explode and not call for an ambulance. I mean, Jesus,
It was a pretty good Christmas.
what kind of a human being are you anyway? So anyway, as you have probably noticed, I'm wearing a fabulous new hat. Again, listeners to the audio portion of this are, um, let's say, spared the
Yeah.
inhumanity that is the side
It's
of my
actually
hat.
the video people who are currently very handicapped
Yes.
because they get to see your mummy troll head.
But I am wearing
Mummy
this hat
troll.
in sorry. I am wearing this hat in honor of you, dear sir. So happy birthday thing.
Thank you very much. I brought iced tea for people listening to the audio version. This may look like iced tea, but it's definitely not. It's door number two.
Ah, which is a weird
Yeah,
thing
just,
to
just,
say.
just Johnny Walker Red Label. Anyway, I actually had a birthday present a couple of days ago, an early birthday present from a good friend of ours, and he left me a voicemail that he suggested that he ordered me to play it on the air. So you've got the technical
Right.
aspect of it going, so why don't we just roll it and then cue into Christian Giegerich fantastic intro?
Yes. Let's do that. Let's listen to Fred's birthday voicemail from a certain someone.
Hello, Freddie. It's Pete Tolman, Profit Mountain Games. Listen, fella, I got your number from Tro when don't matter how I got the number. The point is, I know that you're looking for sponsors for your show. You know, that little Patreon thing that you've got going on. Yeah? It's pretty cute. Yeah. Anyway, here's an ad for you to put on there. Now, I know you want money, but I'm not actually going to give you money. What I'm going to give you, mate, is something more important than that. I am going to give you prestige. The prestige of having my work being advertised on your shitty little podcast. Trust me, you will be tripping over pussy after this. So you just play this and everything will be fine, alright? Oh, and if you want copies of the game to give away in some contest or something, I'll give you a discount on bulk orders over 20. Alright? Okay? Yeah. Oh, man.
April 1944, and Jerry has been pushed back on all fronts. As the Allies approach Alsace, who will guard
The secret quiche of the Luftwaffe.
Yes, the classic point-and-dick adventure is back, remastered, or should that be remaster-raced, for your gaming pleasure and fully compatible with modern Windows 95 PCs. Fight the evil French resistance, help your commandant assassinate General Eisenhower, parachute over Norway, but whatever you do, don't let the secret quiche fall into the wrong hands.
The secret quiche of the Luftwaffe.
Coming to a PC near you.
Oh well, that's just fantastic,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, this is where the intro goes.
There could be a secret passage under the doormat, but we didn't have time.
And boom! Boom! We're back. We're so much back that I had to go boom twice.
What a,
Sorry.
what a surprise.
No, yes. So anyway, thank you, Pete Tolman, CEO of Priapic Mountain Games, for that special little introduction, or voicemail, or happy birthday. I'm not even sure what the hell that was supposed to be.
Yeah,
It was very nice of him.
he just, this is the one guy in the world who uses answering machine and faxes. He just really gets into that shit. So,
Yeah.
he just left me this, and I thought, well, I'd better play it because, I get a discount on bulk orders over 20. So.
All right. So if any of you guys are interested in keeping up with the Peteses or the Tolmanses, you can follow his ass on @PeteTole. That's PETETOLE on Twitter. Be warned, he has a quick trigger, and he has he makes more sexual innuendo jokes than we do. So yeah.
Especially if he gets especially riled up if you try to point out that he doesn't in fact exist, which he is convinced that he does. So don't bring that up. In fact, me saying it here was a mistake. I just lost the discount.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm sure he'll forgive you when someone changes his bottle. Anyway, speaking of being triggered, today's topic, or tonight's topic, or whenever you're listening to this, is really gonna be one for the ages.
It is one of the really big ones, and it's one that's been controversial pretty much since the thing in question happened.
Right. So just to let's just put it out there. Tonight's topic is: did 3D gaming kill adventure gaming? Which is a very simple question with a very complicated answer, I'm sure. It's so complicated, in fact, that I had to make extensive notes on my mobile phone here, just to make sure that I got all facets absolutely in check.
And I'm just rolling, I'm just I'm freestyling it here. Can I have, since it's my birthday, right? Since it's my birthday, can I have the first word here?
Of course you can.
Did 3D kill adventure games? No.
Well, you just completely echoed what Anatoly said on Twitter, because I tweeted that I had made extensive notes for this episode, and he just tweeted, "Here's my notes." No.
Yeah, well, I do wish to elaborate, but I just needed to get the drum roll in there because I thought a little bit about this, and it's always quite a bit curious to me why, we've disagreed on this before, in the episode back in season 1 where we talked about what constitutes an adventure game exactly. And you're a bit more conservative than me, whereas I don't really mind having action elements or RPG elements or, whatever. And I just find it kind of interesting that when most people defend the adventure game genre, they defend it with sort of an argument that it's all about a literary experience, having a literary experience on a gaming platform, getting into a story and following the characters and stuff, but you rarely ever read books which are just, slow from beginning to end, which some of these games that have no, action or arcade sequences would tend to be to a lot of gamers today. So I'm kind of fascinated by why this introduction of action elements, which were kind of brought in with 3D, is such a bad thing.
Well, first of all, they weren't brought in with the advent of 3D. That's another facet I'm going to touch on.
They were made more mainstream, shall we say? They were. It got bigger. It wasn't just limited to like the skimmer sequence. You had a game like Tomb Raider, which purported to be an action adventure game, where you kind of had elements of both, but it was definitely more of an action game.
Bullshit. You were pushing levers and shooting rats. That's what you were doing in Tomb Raider. It had no adventure game elements whatsoever, unless you were a Myst fan. Anyway.
You just described the dick.
Okay. Right. No. Okay. Fine. I'm going to let that one slide because it's your birthday. Anyway, I think we're sort of muddling the issue here because what I wanted to get at was the not necessarily adventure games that had action elements or action games that started incorporating adventure elements. We've sort of covered that, but not really. That's we can get back to that later. What I'm talking about is what at least what adventure gamers back in the mid to late 90s were really fucking pissed off about, which was that apparently everyone suddenly started playing Quake and Duke Nukem 3D and everything that came after that, and they were all these fast-paced, action-paced, is that even a word? Anyway, really fast, action-paced computer games, and there was no place for leisurely exploring worlds and adventure game puzzle solving anymore. And there's an awful lot of facets to cover with that. Of course, we're looking at this now from 2015, and hindsight is always 2020. So we've had a lot of time to get some perspective into this, and that's really because at the time I was pissed as hell.
Something I actually thought of is that there were decent 3D adventure games out there that didn't necessarily have this big emphasis on action. I still actually like Grim Fandango, and I even like it when playing with tank controls. I didn't think it was that awful. It could have been better, but it wasn't outright awful. And I actually thought LucasArts in general they never quite got the hang of it, but they got closer than Sierra, where you have Gabriel Knight 3, where it feels like you're directing a video because you're just shifting camera angles all the time. But LucasArts were close to having a thing going, but the sales just kind of stagnated and it never got off the ground.
Now now we're getting into the first of my many notes, which is that it was basically Grim Fandango was an adventure game. It was sold as an adventure game. The fact that it uses 3D elements on top of 2D rendered backgrounds, by the way, that has nothing to do with the point. That's an adventure game. It just happens to have some 3D elements in it. It's not a 3D game per se. What I'm talking about is
Let's disagree, because it's not. You don't play on a two-dimensional plane. There is a sense of depth. I know the backgrounds are pre-rendered, but you can walk, many to the forwards and down back, and back in the old days, you were just walking to left or right.
No, there were 3D perspectives in like Space Quest 3 and in Day of the Tentacle, where they had the characters zoom in and out. They just weren't 3D models; they were sprites, but they could still zoom in and out.
They were models now, so they were 3D-er.
They were 3D-er. I know, but the thing I want to get to is basically the thing about did Doom kill adventure games. Doom came out in 1993, at least I'm pretty sure it did. So of course it didn't. But what actually happened with the whole gaming,
thing.
audience in general? What happened that made us stop caring about playing story-driven adventure games and suddenly sit down and just shoot each other in the face? And this is a twofold thing. One is that computer games used to be this sort of pastime for people who were already very much into computers. Maybe it was their day job. Maybe they were database programmers. Maybe they were just accountants or whatever. They used computers on a daily basis, and to recreate, they would play games that had been developed for the system they were working on. Computers were not household items.
You had a boss key in the early days in a lot of games. And correct me if I'm wrong, but computers were fucking expensive. So unless you were fucking loaded, you couldn't really take this expensive thing home with you to act solely as a platform for entertainment. It was a tool, a very expensive tool.
Exactly, and it just so happened to have a couple of nice little diversions.
Shit.
Exactly, but by the 90s, and this would inevitably happen, personal computers became a thing, and by the time you hit 1993, everyone has kids have discovered that computers can play games, and kids are very much into the whole thing. So and before you say anything, I'm not going to say that Doom is exclusively a kid's toy, but let's be honest, the demographic for computer games did change in the early 90s, very, very early 90s, maybe even the late 80s, to the point where, sitting down and traipsing through dungeons and managing stats and solving puzzles and such, that has sort of a longevity, and it needs the sort of attention span that, your average 12 or 13-year-old is just not going to have.
It's an interesting theory, and yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you, because I remember playing Doom back in, I started in school back in '94, so that would have been around that time that I discovered it and sat down with a friend over at his place, because we actually didn't have a computer yet at that point, and we would play Doom. And this thing was fucking scary, but it was also really, really, it was good fun, but yeah, we didn't sit around to play I don't know, King's Quest 6 or whatever. Of course we couldn't, you know. We were kids who barely knew English, but this thing which was just about shooting monsters, obviously it appeals to any reptile brain out there, doesn't it? I mean,
Exactly, it does.
you just need to know the words new game and easy. And then
And maybe figure out what an IPX protocol is, so you can shoot your friends in the face, which we did. I mean, I didn't exclusively play adventure games. I mean, I played Doom with Deathmatch and when Quake came out and all of that stuff. What I'm saying is there seems to be sort of a at least during the time there was this idea that adventure games were slowly dying out because they weren't really evolving, and here comes this fancy new computer game that's fast and it's visceral and anyone can sort of pick it up and play it and you can put it away and no harm done. And also you got the home console market just coming out of the gate. You had the Nintendo Entertainment System since the late 80s, and now you have the Super Nintendo coming out and such.
May I interject? I'm so sorry I keep cutting you off. But one thing I also thought of, you said entertainment systems, was that we also got a lot of adventure games that were just shit because we got FMV, because all of a sudden we got this concept of a multimedia PC. You know, the PC was going to be the hub of multimedia entertainment. You can do video, you can do audio, you can do pictures, and someone just got the brilliant idea of having a bunch of actors in a game, hamming it up, and you know these things would take up 7 CDs, and some of them were good. You know, Tex Murphy, Gabriel Knight 2, obviously, but a shitload of them weren't. So you got this whole culture where you know games were just like, see what my system can do, see what my double-speed CD-ROM drive can pull off.
Exactly, and that was my note number 2. Instead of just being, you know, Dad's PC with all his accounting software, and then after he's done, you can kind of sneak in and get in some Crystal Caves or get in some Apogee shareware and something. Suddenly, it became kind of like, people owning cars or having stereos. You have to one-up the competition. Look at my shiny new computer. Look what it can do. And it sort of became like a cock-waving contest. Like my computer does so much better than you, and became a technology race rather than evolving storytelling.
I do think reading upon the history of computing, that aspect was always there, because you had games like, I don't know, Leisure Suit Larry 3 and Loom, and you know those late 80s games were very, very pretty to look at, and if you had a Roland MT32, they sounded great. And I think there was a kind of a dick-waving contest going on at that point, but it was not the primary application of the computer. Its primary purpose was not to support you in waving your dicks around.
Right, and so what I really think happened was, you know, a lot of people sort of go that this was the decline of the maturity of computer games, and now all of a sudden it was boobs this and gore that and shooting this and that. But it really, actually, we were in a sort of maturing period. Now, the second, or actually the third point I wanted to make was that there was room for adventure games and there was room for action games and multiplayer games. Multiplayer becoming a new thing as well. You had the IPX cables and you had LANs suddenly popping up everywhere. And it wasn't long before internet play was developed. So suddenly you had competition elements where adventure games were sort of more of a cooperative experience. If you were playing it with someone else, you were trying to solve the puzzles together. Now you had this sort of a competitive sports kind of.
You know, people would bring their computers and you'd have a LAN party. So you know, basically, imagine a room full of guys doing the helicopter. You know, that's my
kind of.
I was like, with you know, a bag of crisps each and a Coke.
Yeah. And that was great. I attended a lot of those, and there really was room for both. I would say, you know, if you go to a LAN, you beat the shit out of people in Quake or whatever or Warcraft. You come home and you play an adventure game. It's not like there wasn't room for both. However, publishers of the time, and I'm talking like mid '90s at this point, discovered what a great idea Doom was. I was reading shortly before we started the show, I was reading an article about Ron Gilbert saying that Doom did kill adventure games, and he said that the sales figures for adventure games didn't really decline when Doom came out. It's just that Doom sold way, way, way more than any adventure game ever did, and so naturally, publishers in what is now the burgeoning commerce of gaming. It's not just the people in their basements or in their kitchens programming this, putting discs in Ziploc bags and selling at the local drugstore. This is now a legitimate business. So publishers look at what's popular, what's making money, and suddenly all we get are 3D fast-paced action shooters and such. Then feel free to interject whenever you want. Then we get people who are still interested in creating adventure games and still interested in creating puzzle-solving, leisurely exploring kind of games. They come up with their pitches. They go to the publishers, and the publishers say, "Well, that's all very good, but will it sell trillion copies like the latest Unreal game did, or will it?"
I do want to interject here because we've been over the whole multiplayer thing, the advent of that, and I would really like to know where the adventure game market would have gone had Al Lowe had success with his concept for Leisure Suit Larry 4, which was supposed to be a multiplayer type thing, I believe the story goes. And that is really one niche that we have not been able to capture, because obviously I would say that adventure games are doing alive and well. Today with indie developers, you don't have the whole problem of a publisher, but if adventure games at this point, during the golden age in the early to mid-90s, had been able to harness the fact that people were really getting into this competitive element in gaming. Gaming was becoming a competition. It wasn't just a dick-waving contest of what technology you had. You tried to, you practiced so you could beat the shit out of your friends in Doom. And if adventure games had somehow been able to capitalize on that growing trend, what would have happened? I don't think it would have recouped everything of what Ron Gilbert is mentioning, which is probably true, but it would probably have helped. I think it would have, it would have, the so-called downfall would have happened at a later date, so to speak.
Actually, you're absolutely right, which is a pity because I really thought we were going to get into a heated discussion, but you're absolutely right. The whole competition element is so anathemic to adventure games because adventure games, solving a puzzle, solving something is not a competitive element. Well, I solved the puzzle before you. I suppose that's a competition. But I've played adventure games.
If you bring friends over to play the game together, which was something I did a lot with stuff like I'm a late bloomer, but I'm obviously also younger than you, so I'm having fond memories of having a friend and me play Curse of Monkey Island, and that was very much a cooperative thing. It wasn't a haha, I figured out the solution and you didn't. We were cooperating to get through the story, and ironically, we would later get cooperative multiplayer. We hadn't gotten it at the point of Doom, but it became a thing later on with stuff like Portal, and I'm sure there were co-op games before this.
Right.
Counter-Strike is inherently cooperative because you're on a team and Team Fortress and stuff, but it wasn't a thing at that point. At that point, it was just deathmatch. It was just kill or be killed.
Absolutely, and there was a cooperative mode in Doom and Quake as well, and it wasn't the most popular multiplayer option, but it was there. Now, it's funny you should mention if Al Lowe had cracked the multiplayer adventure game nut back when they were doing the Imagination Network, Sierra were doing the first Imagination Network. They were faced with two major obstacles. One was, of course, bandwidth. Doom was bandwidth intensive, but you could play it over a LAN, and it didn't have internet capabilities. And
Quake was computer to computer.
Yeah, exclusively computer to computer. And Quake introduced multiplayer over the internet, but by the time Quake came out, internet speeds had progressed an awful lot.
Right.
So what he was fighting with back in, what was it, 1989 or 90 or something?
It's really ahead of its time, and it's just a shame that it didn't happen. But the idea is so ahead of its time.
Right.
It's amazing to think of.
Like the other thing that you brought up very cleverly is that over on our Facebook group we actually had this discussion briefly, which I think I was much more into than anyone else, which was that if you're gonna make a multiplayer adventure game, something that Sierra wanted the two guys from Andromeda to do, or at least Scott Murphy to do with Space Quest 7, and he just couldn't crack that nut. And I'm not even sure what Al Lowe had in mind. I have read his article, but how are you going to do a multiplayer adventure game that's not just have you ever played like adventure games on the Wii? I mean, Broken Sword 2, the director's cut, has a two-player mode.
Actually, I just thought of something while you were mentioning this. Have you ever played The Cave by Ron Gilbert?
I have not.
You know of it, right?
I know of it, and you've talked about it before, yeah.
It's one of those multi-character type things, but you could easily take a game like easily. I'm saying easily. I'm thinking design-wise. I'm not thinking technologically here. But I think the games that would lend themselves the best to a multiplayer type situation would be like Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, The Cave, games where you always had multiple characters collaborating, but instead of having one guy gal playing those characters in one session, you would, I don't know, be able to host the game on a server, and you could get a team of 3 persons going, and
you're totally stealing my idea, dude. I can't even begin to. Okay, yeah, because this is exactly what what my conclusion was.
I need to see what's next in your notes, so keep talking.
Right. It definitely was. You have to have a collaborative experience, and you have to have certain character classes. Let's just call them that, where one person has a certain skill set that the other characters don't have, but they have different skill sets. So it kind of becomes. And someone on Twitter said, I think it might have been Anatoly, who said that it kind of becomes like a Goblins experience, like the Cocktail Vision game Goblins, which is not a bad idea. I mean, it's just picture like Goblins. Instead of being stuck on one screen, you have an entire world to explore, and you have different skill sets, and you can have a collaborative experience like that. Kind of veering off topic here, but I think that's an interesting thing that someone should roll with.
3D in itself is not really. I thought it was always pretty clear that we weren't always just going to talk about the graphical style, because did the idea of polygons kill adventure games? No, it fucking didn't. That's ridiculous. But it was more this case of, as you say, gaming just changed, and 3-dimensional visuals were just an aspect of it.
I think, I think demographics was one thing, computers becoming a personal property, and the demographic of computer gamers, the age did go down, so you got people who are not necessarily, don't have the attention span to sit down and play adventure games. Not that there weren't people who did, but they were in fewer numbers suddenly.
I mean, I took I think it took me half a year to beat The Curse of Monkey Island, and I wasn't very good at English. I was better than most people in my class at that point, but I still kind of dropped the ball at some puzzles, and it took me like half a year, but I just kept, going at it, and I was just ecstatic when I finally completed it.
All right, I totally agree. The second thing, of course, I'm just summing up right now because I have another point I want to get to. I'm just summing up. The second point is that publishers looking at sales figures exclusively and not what people are actually, into. Not that they just went solely, singularly down one tunnel, and that tunnel said action games, multiplayer games, competitive games. That's where things are. And all you guys who want to, sit around in your dungeon puzzle solving and role playing and shit like that, fuck you guys. That's not selling. So we're not going to do that. And it did take quite a while until the indie game scene kind of developed here in the 2010s or something, like with the advent of Kickstarter and shit.
It didn't actually take off until the 2010s, did it?
It really didn't.
It was really funny. There was this whole long gap in the Space Quest community from the early 2000s to a couple of years ago, where we were all sitting and brainstorming and thinking, well, shit, if the guys from Andromeda were able to somehow get together, I'm not sure if it was ever said, but I think people were hoping that if these designers would ever get together, apart from a company like Sierra, we could have a new Space Quest. And it just wasn't a possibility. It wasn't a thing that people did.
No, because you had gatekeepers. You had these fucking publisher assholes like suits who looking at spreadsheets and shit, going, "This is what people are playing." Never mind asking the people who are actually playing if there are some other types of games they might enjoy more. And along comes crowdfunding, along comes Kickstarter, and suddenly we're able to show people that there actually are more people interested in adventure games than your sales figures would attest to. And also, there's
And
a
I
new
would
market
also
for
say
it.
that, a lot of the current adventure game market owes a lot to hobbyists and people who are just doing this for fun. Chris Jones, who did Adventure Game Studio, is certainly responsible for a lot of this, because that was one of the first good adventure game engines freely available, I would say, to the
Oh
masses.
yeah, that thing being
And,
freeware blows my mind.
yeah, and the Unity guys who just decided to, all right, we're gonna have a paid version. It's gonna be fuck expensive, but we're also gonna have a free version. There was kind of this thing bubbling where game development became a hobby, and back in the day it was exclusively a business. Now it became a hobby.
Right. Actually, back to where it started from. It started out being a hobby, then it became a business, and now it's back to being a hobby. Like three guys can make a game, and one of the guys, the job description for one of the guys is just to make coffee.
Yeah.
And the second thing is digital distribution. Obviously, you're no longer dependent on a publisher having to package the game, put marketing ads in papers and magazines and shit. You can just distribute it over Steam or GOG or Game Jolt if you don't have if you don't want to get it greenlit. Shit, there are plenty of ways to distribute a game these days.
Absolutely.
So,
You can even torrent it. I mean, you can send your shit out on a network like that, and it'll just, if it catches on, then it'll just spread like wildfire. It's amazing.
the only caveat is you're now your own PR agent. You now are exclusively responsible for getting that thing out there and getting the snowball running and such. Second point, going back in time. Now, it's beautiful age that we live in now, and I couldn't be happier because now I actually have games that I want to play again. I mean, I love Quake, I love Carmageddon, but you can only play those for so long before my brain starts itching and goes, I wish I could pick shit up and give it to people. Back in the day, back in the late 90s, let's say, when you couldn't get an adventure game published if your life depended on it, there still were people whose life apparently depended on it and decided to try and see whether it was the adventure game genre that somehow had dropped the ball and was now being superseded, overtaken by these 3D action games. And then we fell into, I think, kind of a dark, deep hole where the adventure game genre started to try and refine itself to appeal to action gamers with weird shit. Like, and I'm not even going to bring up Tomb Raider because that still doesn't qualify in my opinion. But you got things like Simon the Sorcerer 3D, and you've got the Tex Murphy games did this very, very well, but they weren't. There was nothing really action-oriented in those besides a few arcadey type puzzles, but they had 3D, very shitty 3D.
There were usually action sequences, but they just functioned so poorly because you kind of got the idea that, okay, I have to dodge this enemy or this death droid in Alcatraz or whatever, because
right.
But the 3D environment that they did was ultimately so limited that this thing was somehow happening off screen. Your action sequence consisted of a timer.
Exactly, or dodging the shit, which is what the Tex Murphy games did a lot, which is just dodge this shit and then move on to the next puzzle-solving bit.
And that just didn't work. I'm interested in bringing up Escape from Monkey Island because I think what that game did was ultimately very symptomatic of what happened, because I think it's a better game than its reputation gives it. I think it's a decent adventure game, and I think it's funny. It has some good material in it. It's not on par with Monkey Island 1 or 2 or, in my opinion, 3, but what was at that point. However, in the penultimate act, I think you get Monkey Combat, which is, it sounds funny. It's a spoof of Mortal Kombat with monkeys, but it's just shit. It's like
I've read about it. It's really terrible.
If I remember correctly, you have to learn these sentences consisting exclusively of ape sounds to kind of do a variety of insult sword fighting with monkeys. And if
Exactly.
you fail, tough luck. You fail, you go back to the beginning. I don't even believe you can save while doing this. And it's just so symptomatic. We have to get some kind of action in here. Hey, I know, Mortal Kombat. Let's do a spoof of that. Mortal Kombat is actiony. It's people fighting and boobs and muscles and shit.
And blood. Don't forget the blood.
Yeah, it's just a great case of dropping the ball.
What I briefly veering, digressing junior high again. I mean, I haven't actually played far enough in Escape from Monkey Island to actually get to Monkey Combat, and reading about Monkey Combat was really what turned me off. I'm never going to play that game.
I liked the game, but I made it to Monkey Combat, and I really tried, and then I failed, and I lost interest in it. It wasn't a fun game at that point.
But it's really just bad because it is a puzzle masquerading as an arcade sequence, I guess. But it's really just insult sword fighting from Monkey Island 1, just with completely stupid ape phrases and shit. And that's just bad puzzle design.
To it. It's shit masquerading as shit.
All right, I'm gonna give you that one because I have no
that's another tagline. Last time we got you can give us 2 farts and we won't give a shit. Now we got another one. It's shit masquerading as shit.
And we're just gonna keep going. Someone get me a hat.
All taglines are about shit.
We are the fecal lords indeed. No, but really, I just
definers. Sorry, I'll let you.
Right. The thing is, adventure games kind of stagnating, and I can certainly see that. I mean, there's not really much you can do with the formula. This has been like an eons old discussion about the concept of an adventure game is so stagnated now that you can't possibly evolve it. And when you try to do something with it, like say Simon the Sorcerer 3D, it just falls completely flat. And then you get these kind of weird hybrid games that are sold as adventure games, but are actually kind of actiony arcade. I'm looking at Little Big Adventure, for instance. Have you ever played that?
Yeah, I've heard of it, and I know I have the first one lying around on GOG, but I've never played it. I've meant to, but I haven't played it yet.
It's kind of, it's got puzzle solving in it, but it's in an isometric perspective, and you're running around, and there's combat in it. And if that's an adventure game, then fuck it. Another World and Flashback and Prince of Persia is a fucking adventure game. And that's what happens when you start fucking with the formula. I'm not saying Little Big Adventure is a bad game or Another World, because Christ, they're not. But this is where my conservatism comes in. If those are adventure games, then fuck it, all bets are off. And this is what happens when you start thinking, well, we have a perfect formula, let's fix it somehow because that'll sell more copies. Well, the only thing you do is piss off the hardcore fans, and you get this disinterested action audience going, well, this is not fast-paced enough. There's not enough gore or monsters to shoot. Fuck it, I'm not interested. So that's why adventure games died out, is because you're trying to fuck with a formula that actually worked, but you looked at sales figures and went, well, the action people aren't playing adventure games. How do we get them to play adventure games? The answer is you fucking don't.
I kind of disagree because
yay! Finally,
we're nearing the end here, but I have a few points I want to bring up. I disagree because look at the pure adventure games of that time that didn't have action elements. There aren't many of them, but I'm primarily thinking of Gabriel Knight 3 and Grim Fandango. And I personally I play Grim Fandango with tank controls. See, Tim, hi. I'm the one guy who likes tank controls.
I did too back in the day.
I know most people hate them, and today in the remastered edition they've introduced point-and-click controls,
which almost works.
And camera-based. There was another game actually from Revolution called In Cold Blood, but the thing is that these games just control poorly, and they are adventure games, no doubt about it. In Cold Blood had action, so I guess it doesn't really fit well into my argument. But
you could substitute it with Broken Sword 3, which was purportedly an adventure game, but really was just a box-shoving sneak simulator.
I've never played it, but yeah,
I have. Take my word for it.
I hear you, man. Anyway, those games were adventure games, but they were just examples that here you had developers like designers, as it were, like Jane Jensen, who designed great games when she was only on a 2D plane. With I know you can walk, back to the screen and forward towards it, so you've got that illusion of depth. But she didn't know how to design a game in 3D. Gabriel 3 is just choose your angle. That should have been the alternate title. Not the blood of the sacred, blood of the damned. Gabriel Knight 3, choose your angle. It's
blood of the cameraman.
It's basically a Microsoft 3D movie maker with a story.
I actually thought the idea was pretty cool. You don't control the main character per se. You control the camera around them, and you can zoom in and out on stuff that you can't see in the background. The idea is solid, and she actually did try to...
It's just so fucking tedious, because, correct me if I'm wrong, there are no keyboard shortcuts.
Well, you can control the camera with the keyboard, I think. WASD? I'm pretty sure you can. Fuck it. It's not important.
This is Gabriel Knight utilizing a control from Need for fucking Speed. So you know.
Fuck it. Anyway,
it's the point is, arrival.
The point is, she tried. Fuck. I'm trying to get a point in.
You've got plenty of points in. You've said good shit, man, and I hear you.
Thanks. All right, you go. I'm sorry. It's your birthday. You go first.
One point I was going to bring up is that part of the reason why we think 3D killed adventure games is that the old school designers just didn't give 3D a chance, and I don't necessarily think that 3D was at a level where you could get that level of immersion, because it just looked unreal.
Fuck, you just stole my point. Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. So it's your birthday. I'm giving that to you. That's your present right there.
The low poly graphics just looked like shit.
They did.
But I do think that it could have got to a point where it could have been utilized better. And that's what I want to bring up. I want to be a bit of an asshole here and say that I'm disappointed with a lot of members of the adventure game community at this moment, because we've got a new King's Quest coming out, and in my opinion, it looks fucking gorgeous. It looks great, and I'm dying to play it. But you've got these old timers going, yeah, King Graham jumps. I'm not interested. Well, fuck you. Does that mean that if you read a novel with a really intriguing story, you're gonna throw it out the window the moment the protagonist fucking jumps? I mean, I think it's sad that you have this huge demographic of, fortunately, returning gamers who are very much into the literary experience, the experience of sitting down to enjoy a story, an interactive story, and so many of them are so fucking reluctant to use the tools of the trade to tell this story. I don't get it.
They are more conservative than I am. It wasn't until I read that the jumping is automatic and it's not like you're suddenly thrown into a platforming section. Again, it is fucking with a formula that actually worked to begin with, and a formula that does not need updating. I'm
sorry. By your definition, introducing sound to movies was fucking with a formula that worked to begin with, because silent films were successful.
See, that's where you're wrong. That's where you're wrong, because sound in movies was an improvement. Adding unnecessary action sequences or adding unnecessary elements to a formula that already worked wasn't. I mean, putting in pop-ups in children's books, that was an improvement.
That very much depends how you define it, because have you seen, like, old black and white films? The lighting was perfect. You didn't have a full spectrum of colors, so you had to make the cinematography interesting. And by suddenly having access to the full spectrum that your eyes could see, you could dumb down the cinematography. There were cases where cinematographers would play with the colors, but you go from a film like The Third Man, which with its Dutch angles and use of shadows, to just having to realistically depict how a person would see this. So I don't buy it. It's in the eye of the beholder.
It's also we're starting to homogenize the demographic of any game audience at this point, and is taking a step back, I can totally see your point. Because why wouldn't you welcome a new element, a different element to a game that still has the core mechanics that you're used to? Why wouldn't you? When that mechanic becomes intrusive or obtuse or just downright denigrating to the experience in itself, like let's take 3D movies for example. Does that improve the experience or does it take away from it? I'm in the former category, but you know that's not really what this is about either. You're absolutely right. There's a conservatism going on in the adventure game community. But if they're so against adding new elements to adventure games, then fuck it. There are plenty of classic style adventure games where you don't have to jump anywhere and you don't have to participate in any action elements whatsoever. I mean,
my issue is that these games are still coming out, and I think it's cool because you've got guys like Wadjet Eye and generally developers who cater to the retro experience, Infamous Adventures, and they do it so expertly. But I just think it's a shame that this is by and large still the definition of an adventure game in 2015. The definition of a real adventure game is what we had in 1993, and I think that's just a bit of a shame. I've said this before, but I would like to see a bit of fucking around with the formula, and sure, there will be unsuccessful experiments, but still.
There already have been. What I want to see is actually the opposite. I want to see the classic elements take advantage of these newfangled 3D elements or whatever you can throw at it. I want to see Overseer, Tex Murphy, no, not Overseer, the newest one, Tesla Effect. Tried to do what I think is probably the closest thing to doing a 3D adventure game the way I had sort of envisioned it back when that was, back when it was just a pipe dream. I wanted to walk around a world, first person, and look at objects and fuck around with them. What's that other one? The one they did before Amnesia. Fuck it. Let's just go with Amnesia.
It was called Penumbra, wasn't it?
Penumbra, that's the one, where you can pick up items and you can add them to your inventory or you can chuck them through the room. The only thing I hate about those games are, of course, the survival horror elements. But if you went and used that engine...
You can do exactly that in Amnesia, so that's one mechanic that didn't go away in those games.
Right, but if you take that engine and just make a completely standardized, I'm doing air quotes here, standardized adventure game experience where there's no survival horror elements, you're just solving puzzles and having fun, that's a sort of new kind of adventure game that I'd like to play. The core mechanics are in place, you're not fucking pushed through the levels, you're not stressed out, there's no timer on it, you're just exploring the world, but you're doing it using the new technology. This is what people didn't realize in the late 90s, is that you don't have to add action elements to a formula that already works. What you have to do is use the burgeoning new technology to create a gaming experience that just makes it better instead of fucking with the formula, which is why adding colors to movies also was an improvement. Thank you.
Better is a subjective term, and I think everything you said is right, but I think if you say that, that you have to make the experience better, then by definition you will have this conservative crowd who says, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why even make it better? I mean, VGA worked, so, why fuck with it? The parser worked, so why fuck with it?
Right, but these are little experiments we do. And actually, it's interesting you brought up Wadjet Eye games, because I've been playing a bit of Gemini Rue, and there's combat in that. You're shooting people. And you have a health meter, and no one bats an eye. So apparently it also matters who's actually putting out the game.
That is kind of my issue. It matters who puts out the game, and it matters that it's in VGA resolution in 250, beautifully done 256 colors. They may actually be using a 16-bit or a 32-bit palette, but whatever. The resolution is small. If they did it in 3D, none of the adventure game old-timers would play it, and that is, and I think we should be heading towards the conclusion here, and I think it's actually good to have an episode that doesn't, end with us in solid agreement, because that fuels discussion later on, over on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. But I was about to make a point and I lost it in the wave of PR bullshit.
I'm going to interject one thing which I want to mention just before we get to the conclusion. You're absolutely right. one thing I was talking about is, use the burgeoning technology, use new technology to make a better gaming experience. Of course, one thing that's not taken into account with this is that, two dudes can sit down and do an AGS game and knock that thing out in 6 months, and it's a fucking fantastic experience. That's why we've got Wanted Eye Games making these beautiful games, and they sell really well, and it doesn't take, multi-million-dollar budget. Doing an expensive, gorgeous-looking 3D game with 3D sound and all that jazz, that up until Unity 3D was made free, that took a lot of effort.
And now the Unreal Engine and the Source Engine, which are both great engines. I mean, the Unreal Engine is pretty much state of the art. I think everyone uses it.
But you need a much bigger team to pull together something like what's that thing? The Vanishing of Ethan Carter and all this stuff. You need a much bigger team to pull Amnesia together and Penumbra and all this shit. Than just, adventure. I mean, I can sit down and do a fucking game in AGS. I can't sit down and do a gorgeous 3D game in Unity 3D. Yeah,
that's
true.
It takes a different skill set.
Exactly.
I'll give you that. Anyway, I think we're nearing the end of the road because this has been an extraordinarily long episode, and I have to get back to my life here. No offense intended.
You have a life? Jesus.
I have a semblance. I like to think I have a semblance of a life.
Oh, right. So I'll let you get on with your life. Oh, that life. Oh, right. He's just holding up his whiskey bottle.
My life. This is my life in a bottle.
All right. But anyway, I think we learned something today. Let's just do the South Park thing. What did you learn today, Fred?
I'm actually not sure. I'll have to listen to the episode, but I think a lot of good points were made. I think we had a great little excursion into, what brought on the dark age of adventure games, and, ultimately, I think we had a nice little talk about what might bring adventure games back from this rut if it hasn't happened already, which I think it has. But it was nice to have a the tagline of this episode, "Did 3D kill adventure games?" is so simple, but we really went far into the rabbit hole, and I thought that was pretty cool. What did you learn?
I'm glad. I learned, for instance, once again, not to be so conservative about what defines an adventure game. It's really about different. Let's say, different play elements, and once you introduce a wayward or a different type of play element, like a survival horror element into an adventure game story, or a strategy element, which they did with the Feeble Files, for instance, once you do that, then you're kind of, then you're alienating a core audience, but you're also perhaps bringing a new audience. But never, ever create a game to try and pull people who are not interested in your genre into your genre by saying, all right, this is now such thing. And also multiplayer discussion was kind of interesting. But anyway, I am done.
Yeah, and your connection is lagging. So, this was like being interrupted while you're telling me about the meaning of life. And something I got off this was E, A, U. And that's when the minivan exploded.
And that's how the dude got today, because all the people watching on YouTube, whatever. Yeah. Let's just call it that, shall we?
Yeah, good episode, man. Talk to you sometime next week about something less lofty. And remember, to all the people watching and or listening to this, you're welcome to join the discussion. We'll be over on Twitter under the handle BS Designers, and we have a Facebook group called Backseat Designers. You can head on over to backseatdesigners.com for links to Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Patreon, if you think this has been so interesting that you'll throw money at it. And we're looking forward to hearing your perspective. Did 3D kill adventure games? Are we utterly wrong?
That's a very good spiel, my friend. And I just want to briefly mention the IRC channel. If you hop on backseatdesigners.com and click on IRC channel, during the daytime, and I mean European daytime, you might run into me or our good friend Amir at Akago, who also deserves a thanks, along with Joe Mastriani, for actually giving us money to do this. We're all the way up to $3 per show. My God.
And don't forget, Mike, I think he said it was Pisek, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, but we mentioned him last episode.
Our
We've got two
first-
new backers, and they're very dear friends of ours.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I'll talk to you later. Easter fun.
Yeah, you too,
Let's
man. Talk to you later.
Actually, why don't we just talk about Easter eggs next week? I mean, that's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Easter eggs. This is the first time that we have on the air planned the next subject beforehand.
Yeah, and it
So I
took like
suppose
10
this
seconds.
is kind of like using a cheat code. Easter egg. I like it.
All right. So we'll do that. This has been an hour-long special episode of the Backseat Designers. We'll see you next week, and rock on.
Yeah. Give us your farts and we'll give a shit.
No more for today.